So what I want to do here is hopefully build on some of the information, some of the thoughts that has already come out from Lisa and from Suzanne and from Teresa. So what I'm going to be talking about is more of a case study kind of approach here. I'm going to be talking about the BC Safety Authority, where I worked up until the end of last year. What the topics I'm going to be covering, and everybody hopefully has a handout. If you don't, probably Doreen has a few more left. Tell you a little bit about BCSA, talk a bit about a couple of leaders there and what's happened in succession planning for them. I'll talk about the succession planning system that we have, a bit about the background, process, principles, and then a little bit of learning, well, actually a lot of learning that we've had over the last 5-6 years. So in terms of BCSA, BCSA is a private, non-profit organization. We have about 320 employees across British Columbia, and primary function is to oversee the safety and regulations for 6 technologies. So everything that you do on a normal day comes under the jurisdiction of BC Safety Authority. So we cover electrical, we cover gas, we cover boilers, we cover elevators and escalators, we cover non-federal railways, and we cover the chairlifts that sometimes fall down or tip over. But that's all on the technical side in terms of what we do. Stories. I'd like to talk a little bit about 2 people, Bev and Karen. And the stories are real, they're true. The characters and some of the details have been changed, right? Just so that they're not identifiable. So the first lady I want to talk about is a lady by the name of Bev. Bev is a short lady, dark hair. She's in her early 40s, had been with the BCSA for about 4 years in a leadership role, had a professional background when she came in, and Bev was seen as a high performer. Very early on, she was seen as a strong succession candidate. In fact, actually, the executive named her over a number of years as a potential successor for a number of senior leader and VP positions. In terms of her professional development related to succession planning, she was supported by BCSA's tuition aid program, and that enabled her to get some additional academic credentials. She acted in VP positions while several VPs were on holidays. We actually allow holidays there, so sometimes we wonder. And then she was coached by her VP on her interpersonal style. So all of this was part of her succession planning and performance development. The outcome of that was that the discussions with her VP narrowed her focus down to one organizational area, because it's very difficult to prepare yourself to go in 2 or 3 different directions within an organization. So that was really quite key. Second thing that happened was about a year ago, she was promoted to a senior leadership role with significantly increased direct reports and responsibilities. All right, so that's the story about Bev. Karen, second lady within the organization, a tall lady, light brown hair, mid-30s, and she was in the leadership role, if you believe all that.
Wow, she's so young.
So young. She actually was, you know. But she was there for a couple of years in operations, and she was keen to move up, very keen to move up, or to move somewhere else into a different area that more closely matched her skills and her interests. She was seen, Karen was seen as a moderate performer, not likely to move up in the near future, but she was on the succession planning list for some alternative roles, all right? And so in terms of her professional development from a succession perspective, she was coached by her supervisor and by her VP on her performance in her current role. Her performance was tested by putting her as a member on a couple of projects. So that's something that happens quite often, actually. So sometimes you think you're getting put on a project because they really, need your skill. Well, they probably do, but they're also watching often. Anyhow, outcome. So last fall, Karen jumped at the opportunity to move into a lateral position, into a professional contributor role. So that's a sole contributor role that was much closer to her skill set and to her interests. So that was good for her and for the company. Now, one of the things that happened there as part of the succession planning aspect was that it was arranged to overlap with that person in the role, that was currently in the role, for about 4 to 6 weeks in order to learn the role. Really nice, really rare. Doesn't happen very often, but this was a nice opportunity to be able to do that. All right, so the overall outcome with Bev or Karen, am I at 5 yet? No, okay. The overall outcome with Bev and Karen was that they're doing well in their new roles, and that's great. And succession planning and their professional development was also seen as being successful. So it was, something that worked well, both for them and for the organization. All right, so what is it that we're talking about when we're saying, it worked well? I'm going to give you a little background, a little bit on the process, and a little bit on some of the principles that it operates under. So background, we started about 5 to 6 years ago with succession planning. System, I think, is fairly robust now. It's not quite up to your standard there, but it's pretty robust. And it gets better with each cycle because we learn and we add to and expand on it. Gets initiated once a year in late March. A report is produced and, thank you, and is reviewed by the executive by the end of June. And there's follow-up with the executive on the status of the people that report to them, so they're direct reports that are nominated onto the succession plan. And what gets followed up is the development plans for those people. So, if Lisa was one of the VPs and I was a report to her, we would be checking in on July typically and November and saying, Lisa, what's the plan look like and what's happening with Neil on that plan? Because Neil's on the succession plan and we need to check and see what's going on. All right, so that's a little bit of the background. The report that gets developed is fairly substantial. So it has a number of sections. The front section is the usual executive summary, right? Then we have a section on the statistics associated with succession planning. And then we have the tables, which lists the roles and the people. And then at the back end, we have an appendix with all of the succession information for the candidates. All right. So I'm going to just talk about the table because most of the time that's where most people will go is they'll flip to the table and go, okay, VP operations, what does that look like, right? So let me talk about that table. In that table, in the very first column there, it lists all the VP roles and all the leader roles in the organization. That's leaders with direct reports. All right. Second column is the potential likelihood of a vacancy in that leader role. This is something that actually we added in very recently. And it became apparent that as we tried to go through this stuff, that was an important aspect. So what's the potential likelihood of that particular role being vacant? Okay, and we go within 1 year, 1 to 2 years, and 2 to 3 years. All right?
Is that confidential information?
Yes.
Hence, we can't see it.
Yeah, right, it's not on here. Okay. Oops, I see I'm behind in my slides. Pool of candidates. Third column is the pool of candidates for each of the leader roles. Okay. Fourth column is the readiness assessment for each of those candidates. And we match that up. Well, actually, that column came first, and then we added in the one on the likelihood of vacancy. So the assessment is ready now, ready 1 to 2 years, ready 2 to 3 years on each candidate. All right. And the last column on that table is the risk management plan for that particular role. So let's suppose we got a regional business leader role. If that role becomes vacant, person wins the lotto, they move to a different job, whatever it happens to be. If that role becomes vacant, what are you going to do in terms of managing the risk associated with that vacancy? Okay. If you've got a lot of people in the pool, it's not a big deal. Was that my 5 or no? Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. If you got a lot of people in the pool, it's not a big deal. If you don't have a lot of people in the pool, or you don't have any ready now candidates, it's a bigger deal. All right. So next, the executive meets. They review the information, and they reserve the right to either add or delete candidates, and they do that fairly regularly. All right? Somebody hasn't been thought about that they think should be on there, and somebody ought not to be on there. They may also change the readiness rating. So my boss may see me as ready now. They may see me as 1 to 2 years. They assign the potential likelihood of vacancy ratings to the leader position. So that second column, what's the likelihood that this position is going to come vacant? And they do that for the leaders. They don't do it for the VP positions. Why is that?
Because those are open to outside.
They're all open to outsiders. Because they're all sitting in the room. So we're not going to be sitting there as 2 VPs saying, I'm moving out of here, like in a year. I figure I got a year, Doesn't happen that way. The only time that actually gets filled in is if somebody has announced that they're retiring. Yeah. So Lisa announced she's retiring as VP Ops. We'll put it in there. Okay, 1 year, right? All right. Otherwise, it's just for the leaders that aren't VPs. What else do we have here? Candidates' performance appraisals. Everybody has a performance appraisal. At the back end of the performance appraisal is a professional development plan for that person. For candidates, those definitely need to refer to and reflect the development that person needs to become a ready now candidate for their position. So Neil, the candidate for VP HR, when I go to my performance appraisal and look at my professional development plan, it better have in there the stuff that I need to work on to actually get into ready now for VP HR, okay? So it needs to be linked. So speaking of linking, the process links to HR systems. It needs to link to hiring, it needs to link to promotion, and it needs to link to performance appraisal, all right? So, and it links to some other things, and I'll get there in a minute. All right. How am I doing on time? Good? Okay. Okay, key principles. The executive sat down and put these together early on in the whole process. And I think that's important. So what is key principles here? The focus of the succession plan for our organization was on risk management. It was on organizational resiliency. Now, it has lots of other nice things too about development and all that, but the business reason was around the organization and making sure that the organization could fill those spots, right? And had a plan to fill them if they couldn't do it internally, all right? Second thing that they said is that the focus is on the executive positions. Those are critical. It's on the leadership positions where the people have direct reports, and it's on critical roles, okay? And then we can expand later, but we need to cover that kind of thing off first. All right. I had in here a note somewhere. I see I've gone by it. There we are. Roles. There's about 35 roles that are covered. We have about 45 to 50 candidates, and there are 6 critical roles, approximately. It changes from year to year depending on what's happening. Candidates are often candidates for more than one role. Okay, system. A system is designed to create a pool of talent for succession positions. This is very explicit. It isn't one person for one position as heir apparent. Seen organizations in the past that did that. So we're talking about a pool of candidates very deliberately. The succession planning system is values-based, and it's well communicated. Maybe not as good as we'd like, but it's supposed to be well communicated. So there's a number of points under that in terms of what we mean by that. Been touched on. The courageousness kind of thing, and the difficult conversations here. So the system and the process is discussed with the leadership group. Okay, it's not a secret. Internal candidates are made aware of their status and why. Non-candidates who request the information are made aware of their status and why. I'll tell you that getting an executive to agree to that kind of thing as a principle that they would operate on there was not an easy process. There's a lot of debate, and it comes down to how open and transparent are we going to be. Thank you. All right. Overall list of candidates is maintained confidential. In fact, the whole thing is maintained confidential, but a leader will know, obviously, if they've nominated people, what's happening there, right? There's clarity for people, for candidates, that your status as a candidate is based on your current performance, and it's open to change based on your performance. There's clarity that your status as a candidate does not mean inevitable promotion, because we have a pool. There's also clarity that your status as a non-candidate does not infer a level of poor performance. And a lot of people interpret it that way. But you can be doing just fine. In fact, most people do.
So
but
it's fit, is it?
it's fit, and it's can you move up or into a different role. So you can be doing fine in your current role, but you're not on the succession planning list, okay? All right, so number 5 principle is that succession planning would be data-based and that it would be outcome measured. 6 was that it would be aligned, we talked about that a number of times here tonight, that it would be aligned with BCSA's strategic plans, with their operational plans or business plans, and that it would also be aligned with HR systems. Okay. It was made quite clear early on that BCSA would hire the best person for a position. We got a vacancy, we would hire the best person for a position, whether that person was internal or external. Okay. However, that's linked to the next one, which says if we have effective professional development, we will create the best candidates internally. All right? And the last thing that they put as a principle was much broader than all the stuff. This is quite sort of in the system stuff. And that was that BCSA was developing leadership, not just for BCSA, but for the broader safety system and the organizations out there that we regulate. And we know that people will leave and go to those companies, right? And that we see that as part of the responsibility of succession planning and leadership development. Okay, so I got a couple minutes left to get through some learning here. All right, lots of learning. Some of these are going to be no surprise. Executive support is absolutely critical, and I would suggest that if you don't have it, it's an exercise. Yeah. You absolutely need to have that. Okay, well, what do we mean by executive support? We mean their time, because it does take time. It means their effort, because they actually fill in the same sheets on candidates. And it means their verbal support with their direct reports, with their leaders, that they believe in it and will actually do it and follow it, right? After that, then it's good have an executive sponsor, because the executive sponsor needs to hold the rest of the executives' feet to the fire when you're doing promotions and hires. Otherwise, kind of slips. And then you need an ODer, right? Somebody on the inside that will actually do the work, builds the system, enhances it, keeps it, does the follow-up. That would be somebody like me or like you guys, right? Okay. Early on, the executive needs to agree on the principles and outcomes of the system that they're doing. Goes back to people like Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind, right? You need to be there. You need to understand. You need to have those hard conversations about openness and how open is it, Executive time is precious, and it really is. Well, that's nice. Everybody knows that. But what does it mean? Well, for me, on the inside, it meant I had to make sure that I did executive summaries so that they could quickly look at findings, outcomes, and recommendations for that whole year. It also meant that I had to be prepared to walk them through the materials, the report. Okay, many wouldn't have read it. They may have read the executive summary stuff, and particularly they won't read the candidate information. So when it comes up and it says, Neil's a candidate, and they go, what the hell? How come he's a candidate? I need to be able to go quickly and say, here's the information from the person who nominated Neil, right, at the back. In fact, we try to get more than one person's information on the candidates. Creating a succession planning system, we learned that it's important to build it. Start with the key areas and expand. It is a building process rather than big bang, at least the way we approached it. I know that's a real topic in OD. You go back to change management. Do you do it all like at once, or do you do it incrementally? I'll give you a couple of examples where we did that. So in terms of roles, we started off with everything. No, we didn't. We started off with the executive. We did their roles at the start. Then we added in the leadership roles later on. Then we added in critical roles, and now we're at the point where we can decide if we need to add more. In terms of the data, started off, I can remember sitting around boardroom table and talking with the executive, and they would pick a candidate. They would pick Lisa as a candidate, say, and it would be the executive thinking about it, recollections of working with Lisa, critical events around that candidate, right? So, and that's great. But then we moved from that to actually adding some substantive data. So we looked at performance appraisals, we looked at the structured competency form, we looked at their professional development plans. They still talk about candidates in terms of their experience, but we actually have some additional stuff. Measures. Started off with the executive believing in the value of succession planning. And if they didn't, we wouldn't even be there. That would be a non-start, right? But then we moved from that to adding in outcome and process measures. So went beyond belief. 1 minute. Okay, last 3. Succession candidate information needs to meet the planning needs. One of the things that we did learn was that performance appraisal information is specific to an individual's current position, typically, and we didn't find it that helpful. Because what we were looking for was what would that person be like in a different position or a more senior position, which mostly was around leadership, occasionally technical skills, all right? So that's why we went to the structured competency form. Last two, professional development. To have successful professional development, a lot of it's around leadership. You need a leadership development program that's agreed upon and utilized. Doesn't matter whether it's internal or external, but you need to have something that actually gets used and is consistent, all right? And the last thing I'll comment on was that all this is magical, right? No. But having a system and having the ratings and all that stuff is great. But the real crunchy part that I found over the last few years is the implementation and the follow-through on the professional development plans for candidates. You can have all the candidates and you can have all the ratings in the world, but if you're not building them, if they're not moving along and developing, it doesn't matter, right? And particularly in there is coaching. Coaching by their VP, their direct supervisor is so critical to all of that, all right? And it works sometimes. That's it. Thank you very much. All right.